Steve Fryer, and this is The Inner Light. And I've got Neale Donald Walsh on the line. Neale, you're the author of the recently released book, Conversations with God, An Uncommon Dialogue. And I must say, this is one of the most profound books I've ever read. In my humble opinion, it's the modern version of the Bible. Perhaps I could phrase it like an update. In it, you say that the book just happened to you, and we'd like to know what you mean by that. What do you mean?
Well, I mean just that, Stephen. I was writing in my journal one night, not even really in a journal. It started later on, it became a journal, but I was really writing on a yellow legal pad. It was 4:20 in the morning, and I was going through a particularly difficult period in my life, and I awoke in the middle of the night with a restless mind. And so I went to a quiet place, and I whipped out this yellow legal pad and began shooting off an angry letter to God. I should probably preface that by telling you that all through my life, whenever I've had a grievance against anyone, I would always write a letter to them. My father taught me, put it in writing, put it on the mantelpiece. If it still sounds good 2 days later, send it. So I took that advice from my father, and in my life, I have taken that advice, and I have always written out my anger, that if I've ever had it with people, and then I would literally put it up someplace, and 2 days later, if I still felt like it made sense, I would go ahead and mail it. The result of which is I mailed probably 10% of those letters, maybe 5%, and the other 95% never really got anywhere. They just went into the round file. But on this night, as has been my habit for years, I began to write. But in this case, I wrote a letter directly to God, because he was, frankly, the person with whom I was angry. Nothing in my life was going right. My relationship was in a shambles. My work life was in tatters. My health was rapidly going downhill. My money situation was going from bad to worse. And really, no aspect of my life was bringing me joy or satisfaction or a sense of peace. And so I wrote, what in the hell is going on here? And I can recall still the writing. It was very angry writing. The handwriting showed the anger. It was jerky handwriting. It was pressed out 3 pages deep. The impressions were made. I was very, very upset. And why does my life work? Why do I have to always be in such a place of struggle? Why is everything always so difficult? And what does it take for me to get it right? And exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. And after I had written this sort of stuff out for a little bit, and felt that I had disposed of or offloaded most of my anger in that moment, I began to put the pen down. I started breathing a little more easily, and I felt that I had released some of this. But as I began to put the pen down, something caused my hand to hover over the paper, and I started writing quite spontaneously. And what came off the end of the pen was, do you really want answers to these questions, or are you just venting?
Now, up until that point, you were mostly using the writing to vent, correct?
Not mostly, entirely.
You know, I'd gone to a workshop the other night at one of the local metaphysical churches here in Chicago, and someone brought up this technique of writing, because evidently the woman who wrote the book The Artist's Way had gone to this church a few years ago before she had written the book, and now that has become a very popular and recommended thing to do, wake up every morning and do this journaling. But I got the impression it was also mostly to vent, to get the flow going again. It didn't seem to be to have a very spiritual overtone to it. How did you feel about this when you started getting answers?
Well, at first it felt like that I was talking to myself. It felt like it was maybe a higher part of me, a more reasoned part of me, a more understanding and wiser part of me that was simply answering me. And And so at first it felt like it was a very interesting mind trip, a very interesting mind game, and I thought, isn't this fascinating? And so I observed it as a fascination of my mind.
How long did that feeling carry on?
Until I began coming up with data and information that I had never thought of before.
I mean, was it a period of minutes or days?
No, it was a matter of weeks.
Weeks, okay. Let's set the time frame.
Several weeks into the experience, I realized somewhere along the way there that what was coming into my mind, if you will, and off of the pen was stuff that I had never thought of before. Constructions, if you will, philosophical and theological constructions of which I had never dreamed, and comments that I would not normally or routinely have made about things. And those were mixed in with those comments and remarks were liberally mixed in with a whole bunch of other comments and remarks that I would have made. So it felt like there was this mixture going on of stuff that I had said or been exposed to before, and stuff that I had never said or been exposed to before. And I realized then that all of my life has been a flowing of information to me from the divine, and that God uses every device and tool imaginable to inform us of truth. And so I realized that all the other wonderful books I had read, lectures I had heard, sermons I had listened to, commentaries that I had recorded or received on tape, all of the other sources of my life suddenly began to make sense. They suddenly began to fall into a larger mosaic, of which this latest writing experience was but the latest part, the latest chapter.
I guess it might be good to know if we could find out what you were doing in your spiritual life all this time leading up to this event. How would you characterize your spiritual development or your path up until this point?
Well, it was very eclectic. I was born and raised a Roman Catholic. I moved from the Catholic Church to the Protestant Church, specifically became a Presbyterian. I became a lay preacher in the Presbyterian Church for a bit, and then moved out of that completely and away really from what I would call orthodoxy, or from what I would call mainline or traditional religious constructions, to larger, more all-encompassing theological points of view. I joined the staff. Life provided me the opportunity to become acquainted with and ultimately employed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Sure. And I joined her staff and became a member of her entourage, if you will, and learned a great deal about other aspects of spirituality and truth in that place and in that space. Later, I hooked up with a woman named Terry Cole Whitaker in San Diego.
Sure, we know her.
Very close to Terry. Wrote a couple of books with her as her editor, and then began traveling in, I guess, what you'd call new thought circles on the West Coast, and became fleetingly acquainted with, through Terry Cole Whitaker and by other devices, became fleetingly acquainted with people like Richard Alpert, who you may know as Ram Dass, and J.Z. Knight, who is the channel for Ramtha, and other people that came into the space of my awareness and into the space of my experience on a first-person basis, sometimes fleetingly, sometimes a bit longer.
Well, that paints a nice picture. What do you think you did to deserve this honor? I mean, we might consider it an honor. Most people that I talk to on America Online about this topic, they don't have a clue. You know, they're still fishing around, and here you are saying, here I'm communicating with God. Now, isn't that almost sacrilegious In most circles, that's considered sacrilegious.
Well,
How do you respond to that?
Let me answer your first question
Sure.
first, because it's a very important one. Not only have I done nothing to deserve it, but I've probably done everything not to deserve it. I really am a person whose life has been filled with enormous misdeeds and misjudgments, which have hurt a great many people, including my own children. I behaved, frankly, abominably, and my children and my family and my friends and others who have touched my life, whose life I've touched, have been damaged by it, and I mean deeply damaged. I've wounded a great many people, and so I'm the last person in the world who would receive this information out of a place of deserving it. In fact, I think quite the contrary would be the case. People who know me would be willing to testify. However, I think that there is, and I want you to be assured that I'm not exaggerating when I tell you these things.
Sure.
Nor am I being falsely humble. I'm really being frank in my own self-assessment.
Well, I appreciate that.
As I say, others who know me would, I'm sure, agree very quickly. But I think that as I've asked the question, well, then why me? The answer has come to me. First of all, there's no point in preaching to the choir. And secondly, the use of me as an instrument would be a huge signal and a huge message of hope to all those people in the world who feel themselves unworthy. A message of inspiration that God speaks to all of us, even the least among us, and even the least deserving among us. That perhaps I'm a modern-day Mary Magdalene. Perhaps I am the 1990 equivalent of that. Not the saint who walked in the shoes of the fisherman, but the sinner, deep sinner by the wayside, whom God has chosen to speak to as I think, as a message to all the rest of the people on the earth. You don't have to be a Gandhi or a Mother Teresa to receive and to hear the words of God. And so I am humbled by the experience. I am almost embarrassed by it in the sense that my past does not give any indication of deserving it at any level.
This is the Inner Light program, and you're listening to Steve Fryer, and I'm talking with Neale Donald Walsh, the author of Conversations with God, an Uncommon Dialogue, and we'll be right back right after this. And we're back. This is Steve Fryer, and you're listening to the Inner Light program, and with me is Neale Donald Walsh, author of Conversations with God. And before the break, we were speaking about the idea of that this could be considered sacrilegious for one to be actually not only speaking with God, but getting answers. Now, how do you respond to that, Neale?
Well, it might be. I don't know whether it is or it isn't. I only know that I have been told that it's not, but, and there are those who will hold it as a sacrilegious experience. There are those who will call it a blasphemy. I can only say, as George Bernard Shaw once observed, all great truths begin as blasphemies. but if it's a sacrilege to speak directly to God and for God to speak directly back to us, then all of religion is sacrilegious, because religion suggests that such two-way communication is possible. Religion indeed commands our attention to that process, and the whole purpose of the spiritual experience of humankind is to increase the opportunities for and the awareness of our communications with the deity. So if in fact that such communication comes to fruition, and if that is to be called sacrilegious, then the whole experience of God is a sacrilege.
Now, I know it's one thing to ask God questions and then to receive answers, but I'd like to know, since this process has started for you, when was it, around 1991? 92. How has your life changed since then?
Well, I've become acutely aware number one, of the abominable way that I behaved and of the massive shortcomings which have marked my life. And that acute awareness, which has led to some considerable emotional pain and a sense of deep remorse, has led me to a determination to make of the remaining days and times of my life something better. And so the experience has caused me to move to a place of deep introspection, of deep regret and remorse, which is not, by the way, the same as guilt. I feel no guilt over anything that I have done, but I feel a deep sense of remorse. And I think remorse could be defined in my construction as a determination never, ever again to allow myself to exhibit behaviors which don't speak of the grandest version of the greatest vision I ever had of myself. And so what the book has done for me is that it's caused me to look at how I have outpictured, that is to say, placed into action, my thoughts about myself. It has caused me to raise my thoughts about myself to new levels and to new heights. It has caused me to reach toward those new levels with hope and with an asking of forgiveness from those to whom I have done misdeeds, and also asking me and allowing me to forgive myself and to move forward now, knowing that the future is a place of my own creation. And finally, what the book has done for me, and what the experience of the book has meant to me, it has removed all fear from my experience of God, and hence from my experience of death or what might come after death. I no longer fear retribution or punishment of any kind, but I live in the space and in the knowledge of the sure and certain love of God, which knows no condition.
You know, this is very interesting to hear you go on about your remorse, about the misdeeds and so forth, because as I was reading the book, if I recall correctly, God kept saying there aren't any mistakes. You really can't make mistakes, and that even Hitler went to heaven. Knowing that, it doesn't seem to stack up against what you're saying and what you were feeling.
Well,
how do you reconcile that?
Mistakes in the objective sense. I'm not sure. Maybe I might have to read the book over myself, because it really feels like a book that was given to me rather than one that I wrote. I'm not sure there ever is a statement in the book that you cannot make mistakes. Perhaps there is. Maybe I missed it.
Well, I'm paraphrasing, I think.
I believe the thrust of the book was that, and the message that I got from it was that you can't do anything wrong, which is quite a bit different than you can't make mistakes. I don't want to be semantically argumentative here, but I think that if we that a mistake is an error. That is to say, if I'm going to 3rd and Oak Street and I turn left on 4th, that's a mistake. It's not wrong. It's not like, Neale did something wrong, quote unquote. Neale simply made a mistake and made a wrong turn, but it's not wrong in the sense of being morally insufficient or inadequate. So I believe that I have made mistakes in my life, mistakes in the sense that my soul sought for me to go in one direction. My soul, I now understand from the book, my soul came to my body for the express and single purpose of expressing through my body the highest and grandest idea it ever held about itself. And I've gotten in the way of that process.
You screwed up in that sense.
I've made some wrong turns on my journey that have moved me away from rather than closer to the completion of that mission, if you will.
Now, is there anything wrong with that? Because it seems to me we all make errors in that way.
No, there is nothing wrong with that. We do all make errors in that way. Your assessment and your observation is astute and correct. And therefore there is nothing wrong. I put that word in quotes. There is nothing, quote, wrong, unquote, with any of that. But that does not mean we cannot and do not genuinely experience remorse or regret. A thing doesn't have to be wrong for us to regret it. A thing could simply delay us. Being late for an appointment is not wrong. It's just being late. It's neither right nor wrong. It's just being late. Nevertheless, I can regret and have remorse that I'm late for an appointment.
So, in other words, we all have a soul choosing before we enter into this life, but we may not be able to totally achieve it because we're not listening to our higher guidance.
Well, we're always able to achieve it. You say we may not be able to achieve it. I think that there is no time that we are not able to achieve it, but we may not always, in fact, achieve it for the reasons you suggest, because we make a wrong turn and move away from our very raison d'etre.
You know, I have to say that this, once again, I feel this book is about the most profound book I have read in recent memory. And I felt that the purpose was to show others like myself, and hopefully others out there as well, that it is possible to establish this dialogue and to begin this process of introspection and higher learning. And I must say I have tried this, and it has seemed to work for me. I've tried it 4 or 5 times now in the last week or so, and this morning when I did it again, it actually brought me to tears. The truths that were revealed to me about certain situations in my life, and then it became more applicable, I suppose, to anyone. It seems to me when the answers come, they're not just about my situation, but also in a larger sense could be answering almost anyone's question.
Someone once wrote, the person who dares to think that his own thoughts and those ideas which come to him individually are in fact applicable to the whole of the human experience, that person is a genius. And I think that statement, which was made by some author whose name I regretfully do not remember, is right on the money. I think that true art and all great art, whether it's musical art or the fine arts, painting or sculpture or whatever it is a thought in the heart, mind, and soul of the artist, that what I'm experiencing and knowing now, what I'm creating now and moving through now through my music or my painting or my drawing or my poem is so true for me, it must be true for the human race as a whole. That is at once an exciting, if not to say a dangerous thought. It is an enthralling thought, and it is also probably at some level the truth. For I have come to understand that there is no experience that is singular to one individual, but that all of us are experiencing the same thing over and over again, each in our own individualized way. But all experiences are common to everyone. And so what we need to do is simply recognize that and yes, have the audacity and have the courage, have the vision and have the willingness to assume that the highest thoughts which occur to us are probably thoughts held in common by the highest part of all humankind.
Which is God.
Which some people call God.
Makes sense to me. We're speaking with Neale Donald Walsh, the author of Conversations with God. I'm Steve Fryer, and we'll be right back right after this. Okay, we're back. This is Steve Fryer, and Neale Donald Walsh is on the line with me, and we're speaking about his new book, Conversations with God. Just briefly, I'd like to cover the fact that there are going to be 3 books in total. Book 1 dealing mainly with personal topics, and I know you've already finished Book 2, and do you want to describe what that will be about, Neale?
Well, the trilogy that I was told would be produced by this process goes from the experience of the individual, a human being's encounter with the larger adventure, love, relationship, work, career, health, money issues, sexuality, and all of the items that impinge upon our own daily experience of ourselves.
That's Book 1.
And that is Book 1. And then the second part of the trilogy would expand from there and move to global and geophysical and geopolitical considerations of the entire planet, the relationship of nation with nation, the relationship of the entire population of the Earth with the Earth itself and with its environment, and those larger issues which confront the entire world community. And that the third book would deal with truths even larger than that, leaving, if you will, the limited sphere of this planet and moving out into universal concepts, both physical and metaphysical, other worlds, life on other planets, interplanetary travel, the various, the very concepts of time and space, and all that holds the whole game together.
Right.
And larger questions dealing with life after death, and the existence of angels or the non-existence of same, and the true and ultimate nature of a God itself. And so the trilogy goes from the very specific to the broadly generalized, and from the individual here in Topeka, Kansas, or Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to the entire experience of humankind as a member of a larger community called the solar system, and the universe, for that matter.
It sounds like
outward from there, and that third book is in the process of coming through as we speak.
It sounds like a grand plan, a grand design to me. Is there anything that you could reveal from the next two books? I know they haven't been published yet, and I think you did say they were going to be published around Easter time next year and the year following.
Not published.
Released?
They were. The schedule was that they would be finished. That they would be finished with the writing.
Okay.
One by Easter of '92. I beg your pardon. I meant to say of '94, and one by Easter of '95. The first book was finished prior to Easter of '93. The second book was finished prior to Easter of '94. The third book is not finished, even though we've passed Easter of '95, and I've had I had to confront a lot about that. Could God have been wrong about that? Did I mess up? What happened? But again, God has caused me to understand there are no rules. It's a wonderful game that we're both making up, God and I, as we go along. I get to change my mind anytime I want, and nobody tells me that I can't. And the same is true, of course, with God. And so the third book is taking a bit longer to come through than was originally anticipated, but it should be done here within a matter of months.
It'll still be on time.
As to their release date, which is the thrust of your question, it appears that Book 2 will be available to the public sometime around or shortly after the fall of 1996. That the third book should be available sometime around or after the beginning of 1998, and then that the whole trilogy, as a trilogy, packaged as 3 books under one cover, will be available as a trilogy around the year 2000, in time for the coming of the new millennium.
Fantastic. Is there anything that you can reveal from the upcoming books that might be appropriate to what's going on now?
We're tending these days and times to take ourselves very seriously. A lot of fear has been running rampant through the peoples of the earth, having to do with coming earth changes and predictions of shifting on our axis, and the huge swaths of the country falling into the sea,
right,
and all the rest. And it feels to me like we want to be very careful not to move into a place of such extraordinary fear and reaction to it, that we in fact create that result. I would say it's time to lighten up. It's time to lighten up and hold out 2 truths. One, the truth that all of these dire predictions will come true, unless they don't, and that the factor that could cause one or the other to be the case resides within the heart and mind of every person who considers these questions. Therefore, to put it very simply, it's time, I think, to lighten up,
a
little bit optimistic, and to realize that, as someone once said back in 1949, named Norman Vincent Peale, that there is a great deal of power in positive thinking. And I think that we disserve ourselves when we move through these days and times in fear or apprehension, scurrying about, throwing dots on the map, trying to figure out where we can move, where it's safe. We can't be killed in any event. We can't. Our form can never die. Our form can change, but that which we are can never die. We will be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time in exactly the right way, no matter what we do. And so I think it's time to let go and let God and stop walking in fear. Now, that doesn't mean that if God sends you a very clear message, if you're moved at some deep level, not coming from fear, but coming from a quiet place of sure and certain understanding, and if those messages come through from that space, that it's time to move to Sheboygan, or it's time to find yourself in, Colorado or wherever, we listen to those voices from within, whatever they're telling us when they come from places of deep truth. But that we don't move from fear, and we do not allow fear and apprehension to drive the engine of our experience.
Well, reading book 1, I was continually impressed with the humor God put forth. Were you surprised by that?
I was shocked. I had always thought that God was about as humorless as the priest at St. Lawrence in Milwaukee, who was my pastor and my Monsignor when I served Mass there.
That's right. You lived in Milwaukee.
Born and raised in Milwaukee. And that Monsignor, who was a wonderful person, I'm sure, but had no sense of humor whatsoever, I thought that, and he was God to me. And I thought God must be like this. White hair, slow-moving, rarely smiles, says nice things, but isn't particularly funny. It turns out that God's a comedian. Among other things, God invented comedy. God invented humor, and the book is replete with God's humor, and one laughs out loud reading this book.
I did, many times. I would like to know, during those early months after the material started happening to you, as you say, what was going through your mind? Were you able to share what was happening with any of the people around you, or were you in fear of recrimination or judgment? What was going on?
I did share it with people in my immediate environment. I did not share with anybody outside of the house, but people who were living with me on a day-to-day basis knew what was happening. I would anxiously read from the handwritten pages. It was all taken down by hand. Two people around me, and I was also struck by the beauty of some of it. Just as you did, I had the experience many times of being brought right to tears by much of what was brought through. And so I spent many moments quietly crying, tears of joy at the beauty of what was being given me and coming through. And I would have to explain that away, too, sometimes to people who were around me as I would come out of the room in which I had been writing or whatever. My experience of it was that something very, very special was going on. I came to that somewhere around 1/3 of the way through it. I realized that something most extraordinary was happening, and that what I needed to do was get myself out of the way and make sure that I stood out of the way and make sure that I never tried to put words into God's mouth, if you will, that I never tried to proceed with the writing or move ahead except when the Spirit moved me. I don't know how else to put that. And so I was very disciplined with myself. I never went to the pad, never picked up the pen unless I felt moved to do so by something deeply internal to my being. And there were many weeks when that didn't occur. There was one period of time of almost 5 or 6 months, a huge space between June and October of 1992 when nothing came through. And then at 4:20 in the morning or 4:25 in the morning, when most of these messages came through, somewhere in the early part of October, I awakened with a start and realized with a great urgency that I needed to write. I needed to get to that pad and that pen, and I went right to it, where it had been sitting for those many months and began to write. And when I matched up what I started writing and what I finished writing that morning with what I had concluded in June, the match was perfect. It was as if the writing had never stopped.
Picked right up.
That we had just leapfrogged across weeks and weeks and weeks in time. But on paper, one doesn't notice the slightest hesitation. There's no hitch at all in the flow of things. So I knew, and the answer to your question directly is, I experienced that something very special, that something unique and quite extraordinary was occurring, and that all I could do was to keep myself out of the way. So I did a lot of praying during that period, particularly the latter 4 or 5 months of that period. I prayed a great deal. Just keep me out of the way. And I should tell you that the process was most unusual. When I finished writing something, whether it was one day's writing, whether it was 1 page or 8 or 10 or 20 pages handwritten, whenever that writing was complete, I would fold the papers neatly, seal them in an envelope, and send them to a lady that I hardly knew, a virtual stranger. I hired her to do the typing, because this was all, as I said, handwritten.
Okay.
And I said to her, as I sent her these pages one by one or in small groups of 3 or 5 pages, don't let me see any of this. Don't allow me to edit it, change it, or manipulate the data. Just type it, and I never want to see this again until I send you what I know will be the last and final page. And so for the better part of a year, I never saw the material after it left my pen, because I was very disciplined, and I put it in the envelope and mailed it off and got it out of my space, because I knew that if I had my way, I would go over the material the next day and start editing, changing, and thinking, oh, there's a better way to say that. And so in this case, I didn't until the whole thing was done. And then the lady that I had hired, a total stranger, brought the finished manuscript to me, and she said, I don't know you very well. You're a stranger to me. I've done this as a job, as a means of earning a few extra dollars. But I want to tell you, she said, this is the most significant, the most special, and the most awesome, and the most extraordinary, and the most blessed experience of my life. Thank you for allowing me to do this work. Then I knew she was the only person who had seen all of it. Not even those in my immediate environment had heard or read or seen all of it. She was the only other human being who had seen it from beginning to end. And I knew when she said that she had no investment in impressing me with those comments. She had no reason to make those remarks. I knew then that we were in possession of something that would be very special to all people everywhere.
Indeed. This is Steve Fryer, and we're speaking with Neale Donald Walsh, the author of Conversations with God. We need to take a short break right here, and so we will. We'll be right back right after this. And we're back. This is Steve Fryer, and you're listening to the Inner Light program, and with me is Neale Donald Walsh. And we're speaking about his new book, Conversations with God. Now we know, we have the ability, at least you have the ability to go direct and get answers to some very sticky questions. And I found this works for me too, at least on the personal level. I've tried it. Many Christians believe that man is here because he's fallen, and we'd like to know what God says about the fallen from grace Adam and Eve concept. Is that covered in your book?
Thoroughly, and in a number of places.
Is there a way you could summarize that?
The heart of Christian doctrine holds that human beings have been born in sin. That is to say that at the moment of our birth, we are besmirched. That we were created, therefore, imperfectly. The sin that we bring into the world that is placed upon our soul is not a sin of our own devise. We could, according to the most basic Christian doctrine, live lives of profound perfection, and still there would be sin on our soul. This is the Christian concept of original sin. Sin not committed by the baby, the infant, the child, or the young man, or the grown person, but sin placed there at, if not prior to birth. Inherited sin, if you will.
Right.
And therefore, the heart of the Christian doctrine is that God created us from the get-go imperfectly. Then God sent His only begotten Son to save us.
To fix it.
And if we accept the doctrine of these constructions, then we are required to accept the following hypothesis as well. God sent His Son to save us from what God did. For all things, including all those babies born with sin in their souls, have been created by God. And nothing which has been created by anyone or anything else. Therefore, we are struck with the awesome contradiction. If God created us imperfectly, why would we not be rendered perfect by the same God in a way which did not require a blood sacrifice or the admission of prior guilt over something we never did? We are faced with the awesome question, why would God create us imperfectly? Or could we have an imperfect understanding of the whole process of creation? Is it possible that teeny-weeny little 5-minute-old babies in fact are perfect? Is it possible, for that matter, that 90-year-old men and women are equally perfect? Is it possible that we have been created as spotless beings in the image and likeness of God, without sin, and without the stain of someone else's prior sin that we have supposedly inherited? Is it possible that our understandings are what is imperfect? And the book, in at least 3 different places, suggests that that is in fact the case. That we are not in need of being saved from God's own huge cosmic mistake.
Neale, do you ever get, have you ever had any experiences with fundamentalists who are trying to test you? Has this happened so far in your public speaking? Do they try to get you to, quote scripture or anything like that?
I've had that occur in my life repeatedly prior to the publication of this book, and throughout all the years I've been on the planet, and since the book has been published as well. Yes, I have had that experience.
So things haven't really changed much. Is that what you're saying?
I hold no judgment about all of that. Quite to the contrary, I admire and I honor it. When I'm approached by a person that you might label a fundamentalist, and that person chooses to begin proselytizing and explaining with great urgency and great earnestness the point of view that he holds and that has become deeply a part of him, I don't reside in judgment about that, nor do I resent it or make it wrong at any level. Usually I say to those people, I honor you. I honor you for holding the opinion and the experience you hold. I honor you furthermore for being true to your experience. And I honor you at a third level for being willing to be publicly true, to be enthusiastic in the public arena about it. I know what courage it takes to stand up and say what you believe to be so in the face of all the folks who disagree with you. And so while I disagree with you on this particular subject, I will not make you wrong, nor shall I dishonor nor resent you for the position you hold, but rather I will praise you and notice the courage that it takes for you to do what you do. And if you will allow me to disagree with you while praising you for being who and what you are, that is to say, if we can find some way to gently tolerate each other, we will be friends for a very long time. And I've got to believe in the end that's what God wants after all.
I just had a couple more questions. There's some areas I'd just love to get into much deeper, but it seems like in the space of a short hour, it's just it's not enough. I guess we could ask about what God said about Jesus Christ. Is he our Savior, as so many Christians have been taught, or what is his role exactly? Have you been able to cover that in any of the material?
Well, yes, Jesus is our Savior.
In what way?
I am your Savior, and you are mine. And we are all each other's Saviors. For we have all come to this life to know and to express, to experience, to fully realize who we really are. And then that you might fully realize who you are through the realization of who I am. That by living and walking and breathing the example of the grandest vision, of the greatest idea I ever held about myself, I will come to know myself as that. And that as you look upon me, you will see in me qualities that reside in you, that remind you of who you are. And that the grander I am, the grander you will be. And the grander you are, the grander I will be. And that if we can be grand in each other's space, or as some Christians would say, walk in the path and in the shoes of the Master, then we will discover that indeed Jesus is our Savior, as I am yours and as you are mine. And it was he who said, I am my Father's son and you are all my brothers. And it was Jesus who said, why are you so amazed? These things and more shall you also do. So I think that yes, Jesus is our Savior, for he brings to us the message of unassailable truth that love is the answer, and that love is all there is. And that when we walk the walk and talk the talk and live the grandest version of the greatest vision ever we held, we are saved. Saved from the devil, from Satan? There is no such thing. And a being of that nature does not exist. But saved from the worst possible outcome of our deepest and darkest and most negative constructions? Absolutely.
That is profound. I don't think I read that in the book. Very well said, Neale. I want to thank you for being with us on the Inner Light program, and I hope you can come back and visit again sometime.
I would love to, Stephen. Thank you for asking me. God bless.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for doing the book, or allowing it to happen to you, as you said. I'm sure it's doing the world a wonderful service, and I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure other people know about it and that it is read.
Thank you.